Hello and welcome to Osborne's History here. AP World History Modern. This is my little series of notes videos. You're probably going to find something a bit flashier on Heimler or some other locations, but these are a little bit more closely aligned to my actual class itself. Hopefully you'll find these helpful. Most of them are going to be about maybe 10 to 15 minutes or so, just trying to make sure to use the best amount of your time. This one today will be a little longer because it is Unit 1 Global Tapestry, which is quite a big one. So I usually put it all together into one big thing. So that's what we're doing today. First off, obviously, like I just said, Unit 1 Global Tapestry is what we're looking at. This is kind of a big overview kind of chapter, right? So, or unit, I should say. It's filled with lots of little details. I often describe it as sort of a tour around the world in around 1200 or so. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at today, what we're going to be doing. Additionally, one thing that's important to remember is that we have 4 different time periods. So this is going to be time period 1, which is 1200 to 1450. So this is a time period that will be shared with Unit 2 as well. Again, it's kind of a preview or a context situation for what's going to be coming up real soon with the meat of the class, so to speak, 1450 until the modern day. Typically speaking, Units 2 through 8 are kind of our big units. Unit 1 and Unit 9 are a little smaller, not quite as important. They just don't appear on the test as much. That's why we're not going to spend a ton of time on it today. But taking a look here, let's move on to our first little bit. So one of the things I'm trying to do a bit this year too is taking a look at trying to associate colors, like trying to make things a little bit kind of get your brain working in different ways so that you're not just thinking about the history here. So one thing we're going to do is each of our units is going to be some sort of color. It's going to be associated with a color. So in this case then, this one doesn't have a great one in general. The others are pretty good, like, land-based empires are going to be green, which is land, I guess, right? Or transoceanic connections. Hey, guess what? That's blue because that's water, right? But the beginning one here is a little bit more difficult. So I like this, though, as orange for our Unit 1, just because it makes sense to me in some ways. So from Wikipedia here, why are we doing orange for Unit 1? In Europe and America, surveys show that orange is the color most associated with amusement, the unconventional, extroversion, warmth, fire, energy, activity, danger, taste, aroma. I like all those kind of things. Well, maybe not taste and aroma. That's a little weird, but I like all these other things because I like the idea that we are starting off on this brand new journey, right? So the idea we are going to be looking at things that are unconventional, that are extroverted, that are all that kind of stuff. And also, as I welcome you into the class, I really like the idea of being able to bring in that warmth, that energy that I'm hoping that we're going to have throughout the rest of the year. There's a few things in there about the House of Orange, not as important, but then also this color is heavily associated with Buddhism and Hinduism, which are two things also that are pretty important to Unit 1. So I think orange is the reason, or those are the reasons why orange is going to be associated with our Unit 1 here. So we're going to get new energy from the new year. Buddhism and Hinduism are going to feature prominently, so that's why we're sticking with orange for this little unit here, okay? All right, one thing before we get started, though, let's do just a little bit of context here. We'll do some context as we go through. Don't forget, context is kind of like the background that explains what it is, right? So, for example, if you have certain types of music that you love and you were introduced to it through your parents, right? Like, say you like classic rock or maybe you like country music or something, and you were exposed to that through your parents, that might be a context, right? That's why if you ask yourself, why do I like this type of music? And people can say, well, you like it because your parents like it. That gives you an example of context, like why things are the way they are. We'll go into context a lot more throughout the year. It's a pretty important concept for this class. But in this case, then, context is sort of like what's going on kind of right before this time period that is going to be important to us. And the biggest one here really is religion. Okay, so while the Roman Empire is going to have a lot of impact on things like the Byzantines and eventually the Arabic peoples there, more important even than that is going to be the religions that are going on in this period. So major religions are going to include Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, and Confucianism. Now, a lot of you have had sort of like an ancient world history class. Some of you may have not, but some of you have, or at least you're probably somewhat familiar with these different religions. So we're not going to dwell on them a ton. We'll bring them up throughout the course of the year as they're relevant. So, for example, we'll talk about the Ottoman-Safavid rivalry, which is based around a disagreement on how to interpret Islam. So we'll cover it then, right? Or when we talk about the Reformation, we'll talk about Christianity. But by and large, having a good idea of these things would be a good thing for you to do. Something to remember, monotheistic religions believe in one God. Polytheistic believe in more than one God. Also, we have what are known as ethnic religions, which tend towards one group of people, or universal religions that tend towards all groups of people. This is not a hard and fast kind of thing. Some people, in fact, kind of disagree. Like if you're, some Hindus don't think that it's necessarily an ethnic religion, but these are kind of like convenient terms for us to use. So in this case, then, like for example, Hinduism is primarily a religion associated with the Indian subcontinent. Doesn't mean you can't be a Hindu if you choose to, if you're not from that area, but it's just not necessarily something that happens all that often. On the other hand, universal religions like Christianity or Islam or Buddhism are those that are not necessarily associated with one part of the world and are open to people of all kinds of backgrounds. Okay, again, it's not a hard and fast rule or a good one there, but just a way for us to think about it a little bit. Got a nice map here of the world and our world religions. This is about 750 to 1450. Hasn't changed that much, I think, kind of obviously. I mean, Islam has spread a bit. Christianity has spread some. But by and large, these are our sort of heartlands. They're not that much different. So if we take a look around here real quick, we'll see Christianity, of course, up there in Europe. In particular, Protestant Christianity in certain parts of Europe, over sort of in the West area. But also Catholic Christianity as well. And that's, you know, the big one for a long time, as well as Orthodox Christianity too. Throughout the Middle East there, we're going to have Islam, and it kind of spreads kind of throughout parts of Africa as well as Central Asia. The yellow there is going to be Hinduism, so that is the religion of India. And then there's lots of different types of Buddhism that are going to spread throughout those areas over to the east there. So for example, we will have Theravada Buddhism, which is down in Southeast Asia. We have Tibetan Buddhism. Also in places like China, we have sort of competing ones. So Buddhism is very important in China. It's very important in Japan. But Confucianism, as well to a degree, Taoism, are going to have influence on those areas as well. So those three religions are going to be the ones that have a ton of influence in that area. So that'll just give you a little bit of a preview of sort of what is going on in the world. All right, so as we mentioned before, Unit 1 is really just kind of this weird mishmash of information about the world around about 1200. So it's really kind of a survey of the world to get you ready for more important content later. Around 1200, larger empires emerged that were spurred by trade and connections. So again, we have this sort of, like in Europe, for example, we have a bit of a collapse. The same thing also happens in the Gupta Empire in India, as well as various Chinese empires as well. And so around 1200, then, these countries, these empires are going to sort of knit themselves back together again. Things like the Holy Roman Empire or things like Song China. We're going to start to see larger empires. And again, trade and connections are things that are really associated with that. Unit 1, not a large percentage of the AP exam. It's about 8 to 10% of the test. And it really comes, most of it comes from Unit 1 is going to be on the multiple choice sections of the exam. You also have an option to choose a question in the LEQ. We'll get to what these are a little bit later. In the LEQ that is in this time period. So you have a little bit of an option. You don't have to choose it. So that's one of the reasons why my classes tend to do this over the summertime, is because it's just not a large percentage of the class. And so I'd like us to focus in on things that are more likely to be on the test instead. Again, not a reason to ignore this unit, just something that we're going to kind of cover it fairly shortly. When it comes to time to study for the AP exam, this unit, again, not as important as the others. We will definitely go back and we will go through it, but it should not be your focus. All right, we're going to do a little bit of a regional survey here then. So let's start off with Unit 1, East Asia. So when it comes to East Asia, then, our primary, well, really our only empire, no, it's not our only, there's a couple others, but our primary, most important empire here in East Asia for China is going to be the Song Chinese government. This is kind of an unusual one for China. China, throughout a lot of its history, was fairly large, fairly centralized. We'll go on later to the Ming and the Qing, which are sort of in the shape of modern-day China. But the Song Chinese government was not particularly militarily powerful, so they tended to be a bit smaller, a little bit more compact, but they are incredible when it comes to things like economics and stuff like that. So the Song Chinese government was going to be kind of stereotypical for the Chinese governments of the time, and one that will continue on into the modern times as well. So they're going to have a bureaucracy that helps to run the government. They'll have a civil service exam, which is the way that you get into the bureaucracy. They're going to have a group of people called scholar gentry. These are people who have done very well on the civil service exam, and therefore they are going to be a part of an elite group, unlike, say, a landed gentry who don't have that scholarly aspect. They just kind of control their own land. Also, China has what is called a tributary system. So there's lots of little empires around them, say like Japan or Korea, that are going to pay them tribute. So they're going to control a large portion that is China proper, but then lots of little kingdoms around them are going to pay them tribute, and that's kind of how they control those areas. The Song Chinese economics, then, they are incredibly inventive. So we have gunpowder in this time period. We have this kind of proto-industrialization. They are going to be commercialized. And also also champa rice is going to be very important. This is a super fast-growing kind of rice that they're going to get from the Champa region, which is kind of Vietnam. It can be basically planted and harvested twice a year, which means a huge increase in calories and food for all the people in those areas. The Song Chinese culture, then, we are going to see a couple of different things. One thing is that it is going to be very patriarchal. So we're going to see the creation of really terrible kind of systems like foot binding. This is a thing that is designed to make women less able to move around, to kind of make them almost objects within the home. We're going to have filial piety. This is the idea of sort of ancestor worship, that we worship our parents, we worship our grandparents, and so forth. Literature, lots of writing that they're doing, and also the influence of Buddhism, in particular Zen Buddhism, which is a big one. Here's our map. We are going to need to make sure that we understand where things are in the world. So I have a problem oftentimes in the test when the question will ask about East Asia, and kids will write about Thailand, right? Again, not East Asia. So let's make sure we know where these regions are, okay? So East Asia, then, if you were asked a question about East Asia, is going to be these countries that you're looking at here. Now, again, these are modern countries. That's not what is around at the time, but these sort of general areas would be important. So like Song China would be something that's in this area, even if this is a more modern example. So Mongolia, China, the Koreas, Japan, Taiwan. These are our places that are in East Asia. I know that sounds really simple, but when you're on the test and you're stressed, you can make some mistakes. So let's not make those mistakes. Here's the Song Dynasty. It lasts from about 960 to 1279. So you can see that it is basically going to be gone by the time that we kind of get into this. Since we start about 1200, it's only going to have about 80 years as a part of it. One of the things about the Song Dynasty, too, is that, again, because they're militarily weak, they tend to be pushed around a lot. So we have a northern and southern Song Dynasty. The northern Song Dynasty is going to have its capital at that location there that has the star called Kaifeng. But they will be invaded from the north by the Khitan, and they will have to abandon parts of their empire, and they will move south then. And so Hangzhou will be the new empire capital there in the south. You can also see a couple of other empires here, Western Xia Kingdom, Tibetan Kingdom, Goryeo Kingdom. These are all other little kingdoms that normally in history, like if you go back 500 years to like the Han Dynasty or the Tang Dynasty, these are going to be under the control of the Chinese. So again, you can't emphasize enough. The Song are smaller, they aren't as militarily powerful, but man, they have a powerful economic and cultural base, which still makes them incredibly, incredibly relevant. All right, continuing with East Asia here, let's take a look real quick at a major belief system here. Well, two actually, Confucianism and Buddhism. So again, these are real high-level kind of things. There's lots more to understand about these, but Confucianism, again, founded by Confucius. That is his Latin European name. I am not very good at pronouncing Chinese, but it's something like Confucius. His Analects are the collection of his sayings of Confucius. It is a belief system more than a religion. Confucius doesn't talk a lot about like God or anything like that. He instead talks about the world we live in now, right? Like, what is our world now and how can we make that world better? That's what he is concerned with. So when people would ask about God, he would say, well, yes, like God or the gods exist, but, we're concerned with what's going on right here instead. Some major beliefs then, the idea of Ren, of kindness and respect. Li, the idea that you need to act appropriately and focus on your morals. Xiao, filial piety. which is the respect for elders. There's also this idea of the sort of 5 relationships. These are unequal relationships, but they're relationships we need to contribute to. So, for example, ruler and ruled is a relationship. The ruler is in charge and has a lot of power, but they have a responsibility to the ruled to treat them well. And the ruled then have a responsibility to do well by the ruler, but also to treat the ruler appropriately with respect as well. It's kind of a mutual situation. 4 of the relationships are really unequal relationships, but the last one, friend and friend, is more equal. Though it tends to be like, older friend, younger friend. Like if I have a younger friend, maybe somebody I work with, I have sort of an obligation to them to help them out a little bit, and then they have the obligation to, do the same. Also, of course, Buddhism, founded by Siddhartha Gautama, who was known as the Buddha, which means enlightened one. 2 major things here. The 4 noble truths are very important. The idea that there is suffering in our world, that the only way to escape it is through the Buddha, and so forth and so on. We also have the Eightfold Path, which is the way that you're going to do that by doing things like having the right job and saying the right speech and stuff like that. Mahayana and Theravada then are our 2 major divisions, though you could also argue that Tibetan Buddhism is another division. Mahayana Buddhism believes that we as individuals can help others to their enlightenment. Theravada, on the other hand, says it's really just a personal thing. So, like, I have to get myself to enlightenment. You can't necessarily help me out. And here's just a little bit more detail on it. You can take a look at that on your own a little bit later on. This is Confucianism versus Neo-Confucianism, though. So Confucianism is the earlier version. Neo-Confucianism is the version that is going to become popular in the Song Dynasty. And the idea, again, here is that they were losing converts to the Buddhists and the Taoists. And so they changed the religion just a little bit to make it more appealing to sort of the everyday average person. So more than a system of rules about being good, it became a religion with beliefs about the spiritual world. All right, you can see here a map of Buddhism. Okay, so we got Theravada is this dark red down here in Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka. We have East Asian Mahayana, which is going to be this yellow, Japan, Korea, China, and then Tibetan Mahayana, which again is it's Mahayana, but it maybe is a little bit different. This is the one that you would probably most likely encounter in the West. The Mahayana, the Tibetan Buddhists through the Dalai Lama have become popular in America, and so you would tend to see that. You don't see as much Theravada in America, and then a lot of Chinese immigrants are going to bring the kind of East Asian Mahayana with them. All right. Continuing on here a little bit, we got a couple of other empires to talk about just real quick. We also have Japan. Japan has this sort of imperial authority that they're going to bring in from China. They have Buddhism and Confucianism also, though they're not as important, or they're kind of done differently basically in Japan. Japan was a feudal state, even though they technically had an emperor. They have this thing called the Bakufu, or tent government, where the shogun is going to basically run everything that's going on in their empire. In Vietnam then, which is in South Asia, technically, though it ties into East Asia, we have agricultural methods and irrigation that are going to be important. They're going to export to other parts of East Asia. Confucianism also will be important here. Vietnam, though, had a strong resistance to Chinese power. The Chinese repeatedly invaded them to try to take them over, but they repeatedly pushed the Chinese back out. So good for them. Korea has a tributary relationship with China. Scholars studied Chinese ideas and thought, but as Confucianism and Buddhism spread, Buddhism is a lot stronger. Also, one of the other differences for Korea is that they have a very strong aristocracy, which generally speaking is not something that you're going to see in China. All right. Yep, there's another little picture there for you of all what's going on at the time. Got Japan, Korea. You can see Vietnam down here in the bottom, South Asia, etc. All right. Well, let's move over to another part of the world. Let's take a look at Dar al-Islam. We'll talk more about, we'll have a map up there for you in just a second. But Dar al-Islam essentially means like House of Islam. It's kind of a colloquial term to mean the places that were under Islamic authority. So whether it is an actual formal Islamic state, like a government that is run by Islamic scholars or somebody, or whether it's just a place that has a lot of influence and is sort of run by kind of Islamic ideas or principles, that is under the idea of Dar al-Islam. Our context before about 1200 then, first off, you're going to have a lot of political unity from Muhammad until the Abbasid Empire. Okay, so again, there's periods where this isn't true. Like, for example, after Muhammad dies, there's a period of kind of chaos or whatever. But generally speaking, from his death about 632 until 1258, we're going to have a kind of unified form of government. Like, there's like a clear government. Now, under the Abbasids, though, that's going to fade a lot. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. The first group then after Muhammad is the Rashidun, which is the 4 rightly guided caliphs. Caliph means like successor to Muhammad. So these are the initial successors. However, then a family called the Umayyad are going to take over in 661, and it becomes hereditary. Initially, it was not hereditary, it was chosen. And then they are overthrown by another group called the Abbasid, which is another family, and that family will rule from 750 until about 1258. So in the beginning of our time here, the Abbasids are going to be the ones who are in power, but by 1200 or so, their power is greatly faded. Like, they're not as central authority. Lots of people are sort of rejecting them over time. During the Abbasid, though, even when it was smaller, it's a time of it's a golden age for Islam. Baghdad was their capital, the center of world learning. They have this structure called the House of Wisdom, which is like a giant library that people use from around the world. Lots of trades, kind of dead in the middle of all that. And they are important to both the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean trading network. Learning continued in this period into the next. So famous names would include Nasr al-Din al-Tusi, who is a famous scientist, and a woman whose name is very difficult for me to pronounce, but I think it's Aisha al-Ba'uniya, who is a female poet and writer who is also extremely important in this period. Sufism, also a sect of Islam that's going to encourage learning, and they also encourage sort of missionary work. It's one of the few parts of Islam that really encourages it greatly. So that is my little map there I made for you to kind of show the idea of the Middle East or the Dar al-Islam. The problem, of course, is that it's more of a perceptual region, like what counts and what doesn't. So, for example, some people say more of North Africa maybe, but others say no. Some people say all the way up into Central Asia, but that's our kind of core area, right? Iraq, Syria, modern day Iraq, I should say, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, etc. That is our kind of core area of religion. In the south there of Saudi Arabia is, of course, where Mecca and Medina are, which was very important, of course, to the Prophet. All right. In 1258, the Abbasid are going to break up. That is the Abbasid Empire at the height of its powers in this would probably be about like maybe 1100 or so, but it's very powerful. They had been weak for a long time, but their final overthrow is really by the Mongols. In 1258, they will be invaded by the Mongols. One of the biggest problems they have is that they're just too spread out. It's simply too large. You can see how gigantic this is, and it was difficult to run. They also had a problem very similar to the Romans, in that the people themselves didn't necessarily want to fight or like kind of defend their country anymore. So they brought in a series of sort of outsiders, like the Buyids were initially one, and then a group called the Seljuk Turks kind of come in as like kind of their mercenaries or their army, and then they're just going to take over. This happens a ton. They also have problems like Crusader invasions and things that are also going to sort of weaken their power over time. All right, let's take a look at South and Southeast Asia then. We got South Asia, which would include India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, etc. So it's directly south. Southeast Asia, on the other hand, is like Thailand, Cambodia, Indonesia, and Vietnam, etc. So make sure we know the difference between these. These often get confused. If the question asks about South Asia and you're writing about Thailand, you're going to get it wrong. So make sure you know what countries are included in South Asia, say, versus Southeast Asia. All right, South and Southeast Asia then. Political stability was a lot less predictable in India. India's history is sort of one of powerful empires coming in for a while, and then long periods of time of political instability, lots of little small kingdoms and things. Southern India was a little bit more organized in this period, so the Chola and the Vijayanagara Empire are going to be pretty important. The Vijayanagara are going to be one that we'll come back to later. Northern India, on the other hand, had some small kingdoms and invasions. Initially, the Rajput kingdoms then are going to be these Hindu kingdoms, but they are replaced by the Delhi Sultanate, which is the first of our big Islamic empires that are going to be started here. Socially, India, of course, had the caste system, which you've probably heard about. When Islam comes, though, by way of merchants initially, they are going to get a lot of converts from the low castes, for obvious reasons. In response to that, then, Hinduism begins to form and focus on individual gods. So prior to this, Hinduism had tended to be a bit more kind of open, like it was not a specific god or gods that you sort of focused on. Now, though, there's something called the Bhaktic movement, which have Bhaktic cults where you're going to focus on them. And this is the most popular form really today. Like today in modern day India, people tend to focus on a couple different things. Like there are still large religious groups that focus on sort of an all group, like an all sort of God situation. But there's others that, for example, focus on Vishnu as their primary way that they're going to talk about their gods or interact with their gods. And that's just sort of a change that comes about in this period. There's also a lot of combination of Arabic and local cultures. One of the examples of this is the development of a language called Urdu, which is a combination of Arabic and traditional Indian languages. Of course, our Indian caste system here, we got our 4 levels and then the Dalits on the bottom. Got the Brahmins, the priests, the Kshatriyas, kings, rulers, and warriors. The Vaishyas, the merchants, craftsmen, landowners, skilled workers, and the Sudra, the farm workers, etc. On the very bottom, then, we have these untouchables known as Dalits, street sweepers. They tended to clean up human and animal waste and dealt with dead bodies. One thing about the caste system I think people forget is that they sometimes think it's like directly related to sort of your, like almost like political standing in a sense, but you can tell it's not necessarily that. It's really about your level of sort of like cleanliness in the eyes of the gods, right? Like your level of relative like godly merit in a sense, right? So because Dalits were working with human waste, they were considered to be in a sense unclean, right? Whereas the Brahmins at the top would be the ones who are the most pure in a sense. So you have kings and rulers who are running things, and the Brahmins are at the top of that list, but they're not necessarily running day-to-day kind of things. So just important to remember, it's more about your sort of ritual purity than it is about any kind of like power that you may have. This is the beginning of these Islamic invasions then, so 1148 to 1215. You're going to have this thing called the Ghurid dynasty, and you can see the sort of like slow invasions that are going to take place. So we have, if you look down the bottom there, you'll see these names. You have in 1148 to 1157 an invasion, then you have another one, till we finally get to this guy named Aibak, who's going to come in and establish these areas, and this will sort of be the beginnings of the Delhi Sultanate right after this. Again, I mean, it makes sense. They're coming in from the area of most power of the Muslim world. All right, South and Southeast Asia. So Indian merchants are going to introduce Hinduism and Buddhism to Southeast Asia. These are strategically significant because of the trade routes in this area. If you look on this map, you'll see an island called Sumatra, and then right above it is the peninsular Malaysia. You can see there's just a very narrow corridor there, right? That narrow corridor is where the water corridors where boats have to go through. So if you want to trade from India to China, you have to go through that region. So having a powerful kingdom here means that they can extract taxes, stuff like that, right? These are very strategically important areas. There's 2 sea-based kingdoms, Srivijaya and this wonderfully named Majapahit. So you can see in the map here the area under Majapahit control as well as the core realm. So they basically controlled modern-day Malaysia and Indonesia. And also the Srivijaya were pretty similar in location. Like they were pretty similar in where they were as well. Land-based kingdoms then would have been the Sinhala kingdoms and the Khmer Empire. Khmer are going to be in like modern-day Cambodia, and they were kind of a very powerful kingdom based upon trade as well as agricultural power. All right, let's talk about the Americas, Unit 1. Context, don't forget, there's almost zero communication between the Americas and Afro-Eurasia. Again, there are some Vikings that come in like 800. There's some indications that maybe some Polynesians made it to Chile. The important phrase here, though, is consistent, persistent connections, right? None of that's going to happen until 1492 when Europeans arrive in this region and they establish a permanent or long-term situation here. Okay. One thing to remember again are geography terms. We got that is the continents there. We have North America, we have Central America, and we have South America. Okay, these are terms that you'll see sometimes. Also, another term you'll see is Latin America. Latin America is typically anything that is below the Rio Grande or below the United States, all the way down to the bottom of South America. It's debatable on whether places like Haiti are a part of it. They don't speak Spanish there. They speak Haitian Creole, but sometimes they're included. But regardless, generally speaking, this is going to be the kind of area you're talking about. All right, looking around this area then real quickly, just again doing our survey here. In North America, we mostly have kind of small bands. The Chaco and Mesa Verde are peoples that are having more complex civilizations before 1200. The Mississippian Indians then are going to be from around 800 to 1600. In Alabama, we have Moundville. Up in Illinois, we have Cahokia. These are peoples who made mounds for ritual and burial purposes and things like that. They basically are going to be wiped out by disease right before European exploration. Central America, then, we have the Mayans from about 900 to about 1200. There's no central government for the Mayans. They're mostly city-states. Their religion is based on polytheism, God-descended kings, and also sacrifice. Not as much as others, but they definitely do have a little bit of human sacrifice and also sort of other types of sacrifice. They're also going to be ones who are going to carry on the traditions from the Olmecs of the Mesoamerican ball game. This is this ball game where you use your hips to hit a ball across the way, and traditionally, because it was less a competition and more of a ritual, the winners were sacrificed, because you don't want to sacrifice the losers to your gods, right? But later on, it became just like a fun game, so people tended to play it a lot more. Aztecs then will take over afterwards, so as the Mayans sort of fall a bit, the Aztecs will take over just north of them, and they will continue until conquered by the Spanish in the 1500s. The Aztecs typically used a tribute system of government, so they had a couple of major cities, and then other areas would be under their authority. They had a sacrifice-based religion, as you probably know. They have Chinampa agricultural systems. These are these kind of floating islands, and their capital is at Tenochtitlan. In South America, then, we have the Incas. This is the Mita labor system is important. This was the idea of like a labor tax. So they needed like their roads built, so they would have the Mita, so they would just bring people out to come and like fix roads and things over time. Roads are also very important to them. It's a very long empire, so you got to make sure you can get all the way through there. The leaders of their country were essentially god kings. They were in charge of everything all across their area. In fact, they technically sort of owned everything. Like, you didn't own your house. It was like, it was the Incas, but he just let you use it. All right. Here's some maps here for you. We got the Mayan civilization about 900, and then the Aztecs by 1521. You can see they're in generally the same area, though the Yucatan Peninsula is far more important to the Mayans. Over there on the Inca Empire, then, you can see the Incas in about 1400, as well as the Incas in about 1532. And you can see that really complex road system that was so important to them. All right, a couple more here. We're going to be looking at Africa, and we're going to be looking at Europe. Let's take a look here at Africa then. A couple of things for us to take a look at. We got these Bantu migrations that are super important. Bantus are a cultural, ethnic, linguistic group, and they are going to spread their culture, technology, political ideas across Africa. They are going to use what are called kin-based networks. So they're not highly centralized. It's more about your family. So families govern themselves. These are like big extended families, though, not like, the 4 people that maybe live in your household or whatever. The male head chief will be in charge. And then a group of villages that are related to each other might be kind of formed into a style of district. You can see, again, that Bantu migration in the map up there. Population increase challenge these kin-based networks, though, as they get bigger and bigger and bigger. Like, you don't know anybody anymore, and like, how do you organize that? So we start to see the creation of kind of like, more European-style kingdoms and things over time. One thing to remember about Africa is that it is extremely diverse, okay, but there's some similarities. Within African societies, men tended to dominate most activities that needed a specialized skill. So like certain types of farming or, carpentry or something like that. Women tended to do things that were like more like gathering or something that was not as much skill-based. Work was typically divided by age. So younger people did work, but they did different work than older people. Slavery was common in the African world, as it was in the European world and other parts of the world too, but not the type of chattel slavery that will come with Europeans. We're going to get on later on to like Unit 4 and 5. We'll talk a lot about like what is different types of slavery. It's important for you just to understand right now that in America, we often say slavery and we mean one thing, which is the slavery of Africans who were forced to come over to America and work on plantations, etc. But that is a specific type of slavery. It is the worst type of slavery, but it is a specific type of slavery. There are other types as well. And some of the ones in Africa in particular, they were more like, I don't know, it's like kind of like a weird adoption kind of thing. Like you would sort of live with your families. You didn't have a lot of options and stuff. They still made you do things, but it wasn't like you were a piece of like property. You were just somebody who didn't have as many rights as other people. Music and songs, vitally important in Africa. Most art was more sculptural. Masks are very common art objects. So for example, right here above me, this is from the Birmingham Museum of Art where I live. And this is actually a mask, like a helmet. Like, I don't know if you can see it right above me, but you would put this bottom part on your head. In fact, wait, let's see. Yeah, there we go. So you would put this on your head like this, and then you had this thing that was up above you. They had ways to kind of tie it off to make it so that it wouldn't fall, but man, that thing looks so heavy. Every time I look at it, it's a lot. I mean, this is basically the size of a person's head that would be in that thing. Is about that big, so it would be really, really big. Gigantic, really. I also have a really big head, so that doesn't help. All right. Without a written culture, though, there's a group of people called griots. I've heard it griots, too. I don't know how you pronounce it exactly. But these folks are important. They're storytellers who keep histories and tell stories over time. All right, a couple of important kingdoms here. We don't know as much about these kingdoms because, again, they don't keep many written records, with the exception of like the Ethiopians, but we do know a fair amount about them. So here's some details on a few important kingdoms that people tend to talk about. Number one is Great Zimbabwe. This is gold-based, traded with the coast, and it has this famous structure that is known as Great Zimbabwe in, hey, guess what country? Zimbabwe. So pretty advanced culture that traded with the coast and collapsed prior to European exploration in this area. Second, then, the Hausa. These are 7 cities that combined together. Each had their own specialty, and they formed a kingdom based upon that. This is in the area of modern-day Nigeria. Third, then, Ethiopia. This is one of our Christian kingdoms, which is a little unusual. They created what are called rock-cut churches into the ground, and they are mostly trade-based. 4 are Swahili city-states on the East Coast, not organized politically, but they survived on trade with the Indian Ocean. And then lastly, Ghana. This is in West Africa. They have gold and salt, and they are a part of the Trans-Saharan trade. We will talk a lot about their successors, the Malians, as well as the Songhai, a little bit later on. Here's a little map for you. It doesn't have everything on here, but you can see where it says Hausa states, that's the Hausa. You can see where it says Mali, that's going to be like kind of the, that's where Ghana basically is. But you can see Ethiopia. The Arab trading states over there are going to be our Swahili city-states. And then kind of down there where it says Shona, that is essentially where where Great Zimbabwe was. I tried to find a map that had all these on it, and I was going to make my own, and it just got complicated. So this is the best one I could find at the time. Lots of other little ones around there as well. All right. Lastly but not least, let's talk a little bit about Europe here. So context, post-Roman Empire Europe goes through what is called the Dark Ages, where they are divided politically. A lot of historians debate whether this is a good term anymore. It really refers to the light of Rome, right? Like the Dark Ages are a time period where people didn't know about Rome and Greece and stuff. So that's really what it refers to. Actually, the civilization was fairly detailed. The problem with it really was that they had all these people like the Vikings attacking them and stuff. So it ended up becoming very divided politically. Culturally, still pretty similar. I mean, we've got Christianity and so forth, though there are different languages, so not too unusual between the different places. Also, feudalism as a government and social system is going to become important. That is the whole idea of the king and then the lords and everybody down that way. Also, manorialism is going to become the social and economic system. So that is the system whereby everything is produced essentially on a manor, and you sort of live on a manor, and you are required to sort of stay on that manor. In the latter part of the Middle Ages, learning was generally revived. We will also have these things called the Crusades, we mentioned up in Dar al-Islam. These are religious conquests of the Middle East. Not successful in the long term, but they're from about 1295 to about the 1200s. Caused a lot of cross-cultural exchange, though, which was really good. Open trade. Young European men without prospects are the ones who tended to go on the crusade. Here's some of your maps of important terms you may hear, right? So we got Scandinavia up here in Northern Europe. We got Western Europe, Southern Europe, Middle East, and Eastern Europe. These circles are not all inclusive. Like, for example, just south of the Eastern European circle there is like Croatia, which is generally considered a part of Eastern Europe. And then, of course, like Western Europe, like parts of Spain and Portugal at times are considered to be, parts of Western Europe. But anyway, just this gives you hopefully a pretty good idea of sort of generally where these things are. All right. These crusades and population increases and things lead to a revival of trade and learning from Greece and Rome. That will lead to an event called the Renaissance. This is where humans, they're sometimes described as almost like they moved away from God. I don't really think that's true. They still believed in God. They still went to church and they worshiped God. But the idea that prior to this time period was that God was literally the only thing that mattered whatsoever. So humanism then is this idea that pulls that central focus away and focuses on the accomplishments of human beings. Again, it's not a rejection of God. It's like God is great. He's the most important thing for us as Christians. However, I made this really great painting and I can celebrate that as well, right? So a little bit of human accomplishments as well. Renaissance, though, because it's more focused on sort of everyday human lives, it leads to a rise in what's called vernacular language. People are going to start writing in common languages instead of just in Latin. It will lead to more monarchies and also centralization of governments. More population led to larger cities, not too surprising there. There's also going to be a development of a middle class between sort of the peasants and the aristocracy. Catholic Church in this period is very powerful, though within a couple hundred years we'll have the Protestant Reformation. Unfortunately, as always, anti-Semitism is rampant in this period. A lot of countries are kicking Jews out, or they are doing what are called pogroms, where they're attacking Jewish people. Patriarchy, of course, is widespread in Europe. We also have this unusual climate event called the Little Ice Age, which is going to cause widespread food insecurity. If you look at this picture here, you can kind of get an idea of it. This is global average temperature change over time. So we have this period called the medieval warm period, where it sort of warms up just a little bit. And that's going to help increase a lot of food. So that is what is going to cause that population increase. Then we haven't gotten to it yet. We'll talk about it later. But right after this period, about 1400 or so, we're going to see a drastic decrease in temperatures that are going to drop down, like by 1800, by about 0.5 degrees Celsius or so. Obviously, look at the right side. You can see where we are today. Not a good situation. Remember, this is Celsius, so that's more like 3 degrees or so, 2 or 3 degrees higher than it would have been otherwise. So not great, but, you know, we'll see where we can go with that. All right, folks. Well, with that little depressing bit there at the end, we're going to go ahead and call it for this one. Again, this one is fairly long. We're pushing 40 minutes right now. The others that we do in the future will not be this long. They'll only be about maybe 15 minutes, probably, maybe 20 at the max. So I appreciate you sticking with me. Thanks a whole lot. I'm excited for the rest of the year. Lots of great stuff going on. And as always, let me know what I can do to help you out. Thanks so much. Bye-bye, y'all.